My name is Emma, and this is my story, a story of dreams, struggles, and the harsh realities of life. I'm 32, working as a manager in a reputable company. 6 years ago, I married David, an engineer in a local factory. We were young, in love, and hopeful about our future together. I remember sitting in our cozy living room one evening, the fading light of the day casting soft shadows around us. David was fiddling with his phone, a habit that seemed to consume him more each day. "David, can we talk about something important?" I asked, turning off the TV to catch his attention. He looked up, a bit distracted. "Sure, Em, what's up?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "You know, we've been trying for a baby for so long. I've been saving money from my salary and the rent from the apartment I inherited from Dad. We have a good amount now for our future child's upbringing and education." David nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, I know. You've been great with the savings and all." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was David's parents, Joan and Mike, coming in with their usual air of expectancy. They lived in a small house and often hinted about wanting something bigger. "Emma, dear, we've been thinking," Joan started, settling herself on the couch. "It's about time we looked for a bigger house, you know, something more comfortable." I exchanged a quick glance with David. "Joan, we've talked about this. David and I are saving for our future child. We can't really afford to help with a house right now." Mike chimed in, his tone a bit harsh. "But you guys have been trying for a child for years. Who knows if that will ever happen?" I felt a sting in my heart at his words. David stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Mike, that's not fair," I said firmly. "We're still hopeful. And we need to plan for that future." The evening ended with an awkward goodbye. As they left, I turned to David, looking for some support. But he just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated, Em. They're my parents, after all." I nodded, feeling a growing distance between us. "But we have our own family to think about, David. Our future." The days leading up to the big reveal were filled with a mix of anticipation and nervousness for me. I had always dreamed of the moment I'd tell David we were going to be parents. After years of trying, the positive result on the pregnancy test felt like a miracle. That evening, as I waited for David to come home, I practiced how I would break the news. Would I just blurt it out, or make it a grand reveal? The possibilities played out in my mind, each ending with David sweeping me up in a hug, overjoyed at our impending parenthood. But life, as I was about to learn, doesn't always follow the script you write in your head. David arrived home later than usual, his footsteps heavy, his shoulders slumped. The lines on his face seemed deeper, like he was carrying the weight of the world. "David, you're home," I said, my voice quivering with excitement. "I have some incredible news." He barely looked up as he dropped his bag by the door. "What's up, Em?" His voice was tired, devoid of the usual warmth I was accustomed to. Taking a deep breath, I held up the pregnancy test. "I'm pregnant, David. We're going to have a baby." I expected joy, surprise, maybe even tears. What I didn't expect was the look of sheer panic that crossed his face. "Pregnant," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Now? This is really bad timing." My heart sank. "Bad timing? David, we've wanted this for years. Why would it be bad timing?" He sank into the couch, covering his face with his hands. After a long pause, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and resignation. "Em, I've done something. The money we saved, the money for our future child. I gave it to my parents. For a new house. And I took out a loan to cover the rest." His words hit me like a physical blow. "You did what? Our savings? How could you do that without talking to me?" I thought we weren't going to have a child, Emma. I wanted to do something for my parents, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. But what about us? Our dreams? Our plans? I felt a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. David stood up, pacing the room in agitation. I don't know, Em. I just didn't think it would happen. We can't afford a child now, not with the loan and everything. Tears blurred my vision. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of our life, and instead, it was unraveling at the seams. So, what are you saying? That we can't have this baby? My voice broke with the weight of my emotions. I don't know, Emma. I just don't know, he said, his voice hollow. That night, as I lay in bed, the reality of my situation slowly sank in. The joy of my pregnancy was overshadowed by David's betrayal. Our savings, the foundation of our future, was gone. The man I had shared my dreams with had made a choice that shattered them in an instant. As I lay there, feeling the first faint stirrings of life inside me, I realized my journey ahead was filled with uncertainty and fear. The tension in the house had been thick enough to cut with a knife ever since David confessed about the money. Each day that passed was a silent echo of the chaos brimming inside me. I was pregnant, isolated, and betrayed by David, the man I once saw as my partner in everything. One evening, I couldn't take the silence and the distance anymore. I needed answers, clarity, something to make sense of the mess we were in. David was lounging on the couch, lost in some TV show, a temporary escape from our reality. David, we need to talk. Now, I said, my voice trembling with a cocktail of anger and fear. He barely looked at me, a sigh escaping him. What now, Emma? This whole situation. It's unbearable. I'm carrying our child, David. Our future. And all you do is avoid me. I was almost shouting, the pent-up frustration pouring out. David turned off the TV, his face set in a hard line. What do you want me to say, Emma? That everything's going to be okay? Because it won't. We're in deep trouble here. And whose fault is that? You gave away our future for what? To please your parents? The words were bitter, each one tasting of betrayal. He stood up abruptly, his voice rising. Maybe having this baby isn't the best idea right now, Emma. Have you thought about that? I felt like I'd been punched. Are you telling me to get an abortion? He avoided my gaze, shifting uncomfortably. My parents think it might be for the best. And I think they might be right. I was aghast, tears welling up in my eyes. Your parents? You're taking their advice over what we want. Over what I want. David ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. I don't know, Emma. We can't afford a baby. We're drowning here. That's no excuse to end a life, David. Our baby's life. My voice broke, the reality of his words sinking in. He turned away, his voice cold and detached. If you're so set on having this baby, then maybe you can't stay here. That hit me like a ton of bricks. You're kicking me out? Your pregnant wife. I don't know, Emma. I just can't deal with this. He was almost yelling now, something I'd never seen him do. That night, I packed my bags through a veil of tears. My home, my marriage, my dreams, all were crumbling around me. I moved into my small apartment on the city outskirts, the one place that was truly mine. But in the midst of the turmoil, a fierce determination took root. I was going to have this baby, with or without David. I was scared, yes, but more than that, I was resolute. This baby was a part of me, and I would do whatever it took to give it a life. The first few weeks in my old apartment were like living in a daze. The walls, once familiar, now echoed with the loneliness of my new reality. I was pregnant, alone, and the future seemed like a dark, uncharted territory. I spent most days in a routine that was both a comfort and a reminder of my solitude. The small joys of pregnancy, which I had once imagined sharing with David, were now moments I experienced in solitude. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, knocked on my door. She was an elderly lady, always with a kind word and a keen interest in the lives of those around her. "Emma, dear, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you holding up?" Her voice was laced with genuine concern. I forced a smile, not wanting to burden her with my troubles. "I'm okay, Mrs. Jenkins. Just taking each day as it comes." She peered at me closely, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You know, you can talk to me. I've seen a thing or two in my time." I sighed, the weight of my situation suddenly feeling too heavy to bear alone. "It's just hard, you know? David and we're not together anymore. And this baby." My voice trailed off, choked by emotion. Mrs. Jenkins reached out, her hand warm on mine. "Life throws us curveballs, dear. But remember, you're stronger than you think. This little one," she patted my belly gently, "is lucky to have a mom like you." Her words, simple and sincere, were a balm to my weary soul. In that moment, I felt a flicker of strength reignite within me. As the days turned into weeks, I started to adjust to my new life. I realized that I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for the little life growing inside me. I began to read books on pregnancy and parenting, immersing myself in learning everything I could about being a good mother. One evening, as I sat flipping through a baby care book, my phone rang. It was a call from my old friend Lisa, whom I hadn't spoken to in months. "Emma, I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" Lisa's voice was filled with worry. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "I'm managing, Lisa. It's not easy, but I'm getting through it. Listen, if you need anything at all, just let me know. I'm here for you," she said earnestly. Her offer of support was a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in this. There were people who cared, who were willing to stand by me. "Thanks, Lisa. That means a lot," I replied, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over me. As I hung up the phone, I realized that even in the darkest of times, there were glimmers of hope and kindness. I might have been on my own, but I wasn't entirely alone. With each passing day, I grew more resilient, more determined to face whatever lay ahead. The stillness of my apartment was broken by the piercing ring of the phone. David's name flashed on the screen, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a mixture of apprehension and annoyance, I answered. "Emma, it's David," his voice sounded oddly nonchalant. "The housewarming for my parents is coming up. They're all settled in the new place." His casual tone set me on edge. "Why would I care about that, David?" "Well, I thought you'd sorted things out, you know, with the pregnancy," he said, implying I had an abortion. His assumption boiled my blood, but I held my tongue, letting him believe his narrative. "So, what do you want?" "I was thinking you could come. Show some goodwill, maybe bring a gift. It's the least you could do, after the mess," he added, as if it was a simple request. His audacity was astounding. But a part of me knew this was a chance to face this head-on, to put an end to this chapter. "Fine, I'll be there," I said, a plan forming in my mind. On the day of the housewarming, I stood outside their opulent new house, my 8-month pregnant belly prominent. Taking a deep breath, I walked in. David was by the door, and his face went pale as he saw my belly. "You are. I thought you." "You thought wrong," I cut him off sharply, my voice edged with steel. The house was filled with their friends and family. As I moved through the crowd, whispers followed me like shadows. Joan, David's mother, approached with a look of utter shock. "Emma, you're still. But we assumed that I'd get rid of my baby?" "No, Joan. I kept my child, I said firmly, meeting her gaze. David, recovering from his shock, came to us. Emma, this isn't the time or the place. It's the perfect time and place, David. Everyone should know. I didn't get an abortion. I'm still pregnant, I raised my voice, making sure it carried across the room. The room fell into a stunned silence. Guests stared, some with open mouths, others with veiled curiosity. David and his parents looked as if the ground had fallen away beneath them. But I didn't leave. I stood there, amidst the shock and whispers, my presence an unspoken challenge. As the evening wore on, I held my ground. Conversations resumed around me, but the air was thick with tension. David and his parents tried to avoid me, but there was no escaping the truth I represented in their midst. When David's boss, a man I knew only in passing, approached with a puzzled look, I didn't back down. Emma, I didn't expect to see you here, especially like this. Like what? Pregnant and alone because David couldn't handle it? I retorted, my words sharp but true. David hurried over, his face a mask of embarrassment. Emma, please, let's not do this here. Why not, David? Your family, your friends, they should know the kind of man you are. The kind of family you come from, I said, my voice laced with bitterness. The party continued around us, but the facade had crumbled. I stayed, making my point with my mere presence. I was a living testament to their false assumptions and broken promises. As the evening drew to a close, I left the house, my head held high. I had faced them all, spoken my truth, and stood my ground. It was a declaration of my strength, my refusal to be silenced or shamed. The days following the housewarming party were a whirlwind of emotions. I had made my stand, revealed my truth in the most public way I could have imagined. The fallout was immediate and intense. I was at my apartment, still processing the events of that night, when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lisa, a close friend and one of the few people I still kept in touch with. Hey, Emma. Just heard about the party. Are you okay? Her message read. I sighed, typing out a response. Yeah, I'm fine. It was tough, but I had to do it. My phone rang almost immediately, Lisa's name flashing on the screen. Emma, you can't just drop a bomb like that and say you're fine. Tell me everything. Her concern was touching, and in that moment, I needed to talk to someone who genuinely cared. It was a mess, Lisa. I showed up, and David and his parents were shocked. They thought I'd had an abortion. Wow, that's intense. But I'm proud of you for standing up to them, she said, her voice filled with admiration. The conversation with Lisa was a much-needed relief, but it couldn't erase the reality of my situation. David's parents, and David himself, had been under the impression that I would just quietly fade away, that I wouldn't dare disrupt their perfect little celebration with the truth of their son's actions. A few days later, I received a call from someone unexpected, David's boss, Mr. Henderson. He had always been cordial to me at company events, but we were hardly acquaintances. Emma, this is Frank Henderson. I was at the party, and I was surprised by what I heard, he said, his voice uneasy. I'm sure you were. I'm sure a lot of people were, I replied, my tone guarded. I just wanted to say, if there's anything you need, any help at work or anything, just let me know. I had no idea about what David had done, he offered. His offer was unexpected, and it gave me a slight pause. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I appreciate that. The call ended on a polite note, but it left me thinking. David's actions, and the subsequent reveal at the party, had wider implications than I had anticipated. People were talking, taking sides, and in the middle of it all was me, still trying to navigate my way through this chaos. The decision to file for divorce was not just a choice, it was a necessity. I couldn't let David and his actions go unpunished. The emotional turmoil he put me through, especially with his demands for an abortion, was unforgivable. I was ready to fight for my rights, for my unborn child's future, and for what was morally just. Sitting across from my lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, I explained my decision. I want to file for divorce. I need alimony for our child, and I want a majority of his assets. He also pushed me for an abortion. That's emotional abuse, and I won't let it slide. Mr. Jenkins, a no-nonsense man with a keen legal mind, nodded. Do you have any proof of these demands for an abortion, Emma? I pulled out my phone, where I had saved the recording of that fateful conversation with David. I recorded it. He didn't know, but I did. It was the only way I knew how to protect myself. Mr. Jenkins listened to the recording, his expression hardening. This is good, Emma. This will be key in court. The day of the court hearing was a storm of emotions. I sat there, heavily pregnant, facing the man I once loved, now my adversary. David looked confident, perhaps believing that the system would favor him. When it was my turn to present my case, Mr. Jenkins played the recording. David's voice filled the room, cold and clear, demanding an abortion. You could feel the shock in the courtroom. David's face turned red with anger. You recorded me? That's low, Emma. You won't prove anything with that. I looked him straight in the eyes, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I recorded it because I knew this day would come. Because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. You wanted me to get rid of our baby, David. The court needs to know the truth. His lawyer tried to object, to discredit the recording, but the damage was done. The judge listened intently, his expression growing graver by the minute. After both sides presented their cases, the judge delivered his verdict. The court rules in favor of Ms. Emma. The evidence of emotional abuse is clear and compelling. Mr. David is ordered to pay alimony and a majority of his assets as compensation. David stood there, stunned, as the judge announced the verdict. He turned to me, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You've ruined me, Emma. I hope you're happy. I looked back at him, feeling a surge of vindication. This isn't about revenge, David. It's about justice. For me, and for our child. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a burden lift off my shoulders. It had been a tough battle, but I had won. More importantly, I had stood up for myself and my child. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Sitting in the small, cozy nursery I had prepared in my apartment, I cradled my newborn son, Aiden, in my arms. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, a symbol of a new bond, a new life. The struggles of the past months seemed to melt away in his innocent gaze. My friend Lisa came by to visit, her face beaming as she saw Aiden. He's gorgeous, Emma. You did it, you're a mom now. I smiled, feeling a mix of exhaustion and elation. Yeah, I am. It's still sinking in. Lisa sat beside me, her eyes softening as she looked at Aiden. How are you holding up? After everything? I sighed, looking down at my son. It's been tough, Lisa. But looking at him, I know it was all worth it. He's my little miracle. As we chatted, the topic of David inevitably came up. Have you heard from him since the court ruling? Lisa asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I shook my head. No, and I don't expect to. He's paying the alimony, that's all that matters now. Aiden and we're moving on. The conversation drifted to plans for the future. I talked about my hopes for Aiden, for us. Despite the hardships, I felt a sense of optimism, a belief that we could make it. A few days later, I took Aiden for a walk in the park. The fresh air and the sound of children playing around us felt like a balm to my soul. As I pushed the stroller, an elderly woman stopped me. He's a beautiful baby, dear, she said, smiling warmly at Aiden. Thank you, I replied, feeling a surge of pride. Treasure these moments, they grow up so fast, she advised, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. I nodded, knowing she was right. I will. Every single moment. Walking back home, I thought about the journey I had been on. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, and now, the joy of motherhood. It hadn't been an easy path, but it had led me here, to a new beginning with my son.